In this episode of The Bear Roars, Dan Caruso sits down with Chris Pearson, CEO of Agile Space Industries, to explore how space is becoming one of the world's most important battlegrounds and economic frontiers. Chris shares how the plummeting cost of launch and the rise of mega-constellations are reshaping defense tech, why propulsion and mobility in orbit are critical to both security and commerce, and how Colorado has emerged as a nucleus for space innovation. Let's poke the bear to kick off the conversation.
Chris Pearson, this is the third attempt. I think one time you had to cancel, another time I had to cancel, so we've been meaning to get you on here for quite some time.
Yeah, it's great to make it work. It's good to see you, Dan.
Good deal. So we're going to get into the history of you, the history of Agile. But where I want to start with is defense tech and the category of space tech within defense tech. It's booming right now. And it's booming in a lot of different dimensions, a lot of which creates significant opportunity for Agile. And it creates real significant opportunity for the state of Colorado overall because of how well we match up with defense tech. So tell us about defense tech. What's going on in defense tech? What are the drivers? How big of a deal is it? Why is it important to Colorado? Why is Colorado well positioned? What's going on in this really interesting category?
Yeah, I think there's probably a couple of trends that are worth bringing up that have kind of driven things. So I've been in industry for almost 30 years now, and I began on a very traditional kind of military space program. It took maybe 5 to 10 years to buy that spacecraft and actually get it to space. So by the time it was actually up there, it's actually the payload itself can be quite obsolescent. There's been a real push to try and improve that. So there's a few things that have happened that have really helped it. So kind of SpaceX is one of them. You know, one of the
You bring it in.
Oh, thank you, Kendall. One of the real barriers was just actually getting to space. So you tended to have a small number of launch vehicles that only launched a few times a year. What's happened now with SpaceX? Everyone talks about the cost of launch going down. So it's an order of maybe 10 or 20 less than it was when I began in the industry, but the cadence as well. I mean, those launches that were globally about once a month, you've got SpaceX that launch 1 or 2 times a week now. It's just insane. So that's really driven down the kind of cost, like getting to space, and the military's taking advantage of that. So whereas in the past you'd have these big monolithic spacecraft that would be like a couple of $1 billion each, they're being disaggregated now. So the job of just one spacecraft is being done by a number of small spacecraft, and they can be just built much more efficiently, much more low cost, and much more quickly as well. So that's the kind of opportunity. And then the other side of it that's really driven it is there's a real recognition now that a big part of the next war that hopefully won't come, but the next sort of large war is going to be largely fought in space. Space is a huge part of our military force. It's a big multiplier. So
Yeah, I would even think broader than just the next war being caught in space. It's also the economic engine creation opportunity extends into space. Like what nations are going to grow their economies the quickest and in what ways is tied to what they're doing in space. It's not just from a defense war standpoint, but overall economic.
Yeah, standpoint. so that kind of line between commercial and military is really blurred now. So you take military communications, like maybe 10, 20 years ago, the military owned all its networks. They owned all its space assets, everything that was going through. The last 10 or 15 years, there's been a big shift towards putting that through more commercial operators. Now you've got a situation where it's completely owned by stuff on the commercial side when you look at Starlink. So yeah, you've now got a situation where, especially in Europe, these operators that the military relied on, if they want to do it efficiently, it's becoming a real advantage to actually have that within your own economy.
Because there's almost like 3 eras, maybe. One was where it was government only. The second era was SpaceX dominance. And the third era, which I think has begun, is it's a lot more than SpaceX era. So now there's a lot of alternatives to SpaceX, not just here in the U.S., but in other parts of the world that are beginning to gain traction and will, over time, start to have a significant role in launches and in space activities beyond what is still largely dominated by SpaceX. Is that a way to think about it?
I think it's true and it's not true. So I think where it's true is SpaceX has enabled a whole bunch of business models which can serve the military and serve the commercial side, which just couldn't exist before. So a really good example is there are companies out there now that do signals intelligence on behalf of the military. So these are purely commercial owned assets that kind of hoover up RF. They do analytics of it that gives it intelligence insights. That wasn't possible before. That company could only exist because of the low barrier of kind of launch costs, which SpaceX have opened up. So yes, there's definitely new business models. There's other folks that are coming in, but when you look that, I think it's something like 90% of the launch mass for the world is going through SpaceX. They still hold a big strangleneck on that supply.
And what's interesting is this dynamic where the governments around the U.S., including governments around the world, including the U.S., still have this dependence on SpaceX. Elon has maybe played an aggressive hand at times, reminding them of how critical he is and how his decision-making matters, which motivates them, one, to sort of want to stay in good stead with SpaceX and Elon Musk, but at the same time want to create significant alternatives. And I suspect behind closed doors, there's a lot of push to figure out how to decrease the dependency on SpaceX by creating viable competitive alternatives to SpaceX, not just here in the U.S., but in Europe and in other parts of the world. I
think that's absolutely true. So, I've been involved in it for a while, and there's always been a push in the U.S., especially, to have two sources for everything in space. Now, there's a certain level of supply chain you're never going to get to, but there's a recognition that pendulum has come too far. So yeah, put politics aside. That's always been industrial-based policy. And then internationally, we're working with a company called the Exploration Company in Europe. And I see them as the kind of European answer to SpaceX. So they have no reusability in our launch vehicles in our Europe. If you take it back about...
They have none right now.
None right now.
But as Exploration Company?
They're more on the spacecraft side than the actual launch side. But whereas 10 or 15 years ago, you had ESA, Ariane, it's basically the European launchers, they actually dominated getting commercial geo assets to space, which was the bulk of the market. That has all gone to SpaceX. So they're trying to invigorate a new kind of commercial set of companies in Europe, and Exploration Company is one of them. So where they take on SpaceX is right now delivering cargo to the space station is primarily from there. They're going to be launching their own service in about 3 years, and we're actually going to be providing the propulsion for that. That's going to be used to dock with the space station to resupply those astronauts. So there's a move to kind of catch up and get the European space economy a little bit more commercial than it's been, but there is a long way to go behind the US.
What other rivals to SpaceX are there?
Yeah, so SpaceX is so dominant now, like across just about all of the verticals. So if you look at launch in the US, the only ones that are really in that class of vehicle, Northrop Grumman with Antares, they have probably not even a tenth of the cadence. It's really Blue Origin. So with Jeff Bezos coming through with his new launcher, New Glenn, that has a capacity to actually take on Falcon Heavy, which is their biggest vehicle. But they've only launched once, so there's a long way to catch up. There's a few small launches around, but they don't really compete. A little bit more niche. So on the launch, as I say, that's their biggest dominance. The big LEO comm stuff on the mega-constellations is interesting. So I'm sure you guys, there's a few in the audience who've got Starlink terminals. That constellation is now about 5,000 or 6,000 spacecraft. That's more spacecraft that was ever launched in the history of the space industry before about 5 years ago. That has been providing a global broadband service that just wasn't possible before. Again, it's Jeff Bezos, this time through Amazon and Kuiper. That's coming through. There is a European one called OneWeb, which is competing. Now the Chinese have actually begun to build out their own constellation as well. So it's coming. But in each of these ones, there's a lot of play. I guess the last one is maybe exploration. So they do a lot for NASA. They launch astronauts to the space station. Boeing are a few years behind there. Had some issues with their vehicle. And Lockheed do a lot of the exploration stuff with Orion. But it's fragmented. There's no one who has the scale and breadth that SpaceX do. They've done a fantastic job the last couple of decades.
Yeah, no, they've opened up the space economy. I mean,
Absolutely.
The space economy really didn't exist in any meaningful way. It was basically government driven entirely, and narrow use cases, as you said, very expensive, long lead times, prone to delays. And now all of a sudden, all these things are beginning to happen in space. And we have SpaceX to thank for that. So let's talk about Colorado. So what is Colorado's position in this industry?
Yeah, so I think we're number 3 now in terms of the size of the space economy compared to the rest of the states. I think we've hovered around 2 and 3 for a while. And there's a real nucleus here. So actually where I began my career, I was doing a US, UK, MOD, DoD program. There's a lot of U.S. Air Force and right now Space Force assets, especially down in Colorado Springs, a little bit down in Denver as well. That is a big employer. So what that's sucked in is a whole bunch of the bigger suppliers. So Lockheed have a huge site down in South Denver. It's actually in a place called Waterton Canyon, and the only reason that it was actually put in Waterton Canyon in the early days is it was the best site they could find in the middle of the country where it couldn't be hit by a missile from both sides.
Oh, wow.
It's kind of cool. So yeah, there's the Lockheed site that spawned a whole bunch of other subcontractors down there in Littleton area. But yeah, more recently there's Ball Aerospace, or kind of BAE these days. It was just bought. That's probably employs about 3,000 people on its own. Raytheon, Blue Origin. There's this ecosystem.
And what does Blue Origin
talent.
have here?
Blue Origin has some of their spacecraft activities here. We do a lot of work with Sierra Space as well.
And Sierra Space is here.
Yeah, working on the Dream Chaser here. We primarily work with the National Defense Group, but again, they employ a few thousand folks. So you have this, fantastic sort of talent base. If you're going to come in and actually begin a new company, I've been lucky enough to work on 3 here. It's an excellent place to scale. And then more recently, obviously, I've been working with folks like yourself on the investment side. There's a real sort of clash of Venn diagrams there of those talent demand now, because the space industry is so nascent, and the investment that there's a huge amount going on.
And so we talked about the larger company, the government, Space Force, Air Force. We talked about the larger companies, their defense space divisions, or even their headquarters here. But let's talk about companies like Agile. How much startup scale activity is here in space tech?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but there's dozens of these new companies which come through. Some of them are kind of software based. There's a really interesting company down in Louisville I've been watching recently. They've done a lot of work doing operations for the military around the moon, but actually developing a whole bunch of software applications to get more efficient trajectories, maneuvers to enable defense customers to be able to solve problems. So it's not just the kind of hardware side of things, the things that you kind of see that are visible. It's those end products that enable you to make the most of them as well.
Yeah. And there's Lunar Outpost is here,
right.
Ursa Major is here, Voyager Space just went public in a well-executed IPO in this difficult-to-go public environment. And another dozen more. Advanced Space is doing well, growing significantly. So there's a number of examples of companies like Agile that were born here, are scaling here, and in many cases are becoming worth hundreds of millions and over $1 billion here. So this is a thriving ecosystem for
absolutely
kind of startup scale-up activity around space, and by extension around space tech. And I know you have your good friend also named Chris, who's in cyber. So cyber is another category of space tech that has a presence here, not space tech, of defense tech. Then quantum is increasingly being an important part of defense tech as well. So 3 of the major categories. Well, I should also mention my old industry. This is a major home of digital infrastructure, which with AI and soon to be quantum, that becomes really important in the defense tech world as well. So from a defense tech ecosystem, Colorado is one of the more interesting geographies.
Absolutely.
Yep. So what does Agile do? So Agile does thrusters, it does tanks. What does Agile do, and what makes Agile unique?
Yeah, so just we do all those things, but what we really do is we help our customers to be more mobile in space. So we're not getting spacecraft to space, but there's a certain class of customers that need to move around in space very, very quickly. And to do that, the only real technology that's available these days is actually chemical propulsion. So you need a fuel, you have a powerful mission, you need an oxidizer, they have to be stored in tanks on the spacecraft, and then that gets transferred to an engine that basically gives you the kick to actually move around and provide what's called delta V. Agile is a really cool company. It began the opposite way to what you normally expect with a tech firm. We didn't begin with the technology. We actually began as a service company. So our founder was very experienced with kind of testing chemical systems. And if you imagine you're firing an engine and you have to simulate space, it's actually a very tricky problem because you've got to get rid of a whole bunch of exhaust gases incredibly fast. So the test facilities you need to actually test these engines can be more complex than the engines themselves. And we spent the first decade of the business getting two very much state-of-the-art test stands up and running down in Durango. They're down in Durango because that's where the founder's mother lived. And it's a mile closer to space, I guess. That's the other thing we always say. But it's mainly because of his founder. It's a mile closer to space.
Oh.
So that low pressure and low altitude and low altitude and high altitude actually makes the problem easier. We tested for the likes of Raytheon, Boeing, a lot of the government agencies, basically proving out engines. And then about 5 years ago, we realized that metal additive manufacturing, this is very, very much for high temperature alloys that you use in rocket engines. That AM was at a point where we could really take advantage of it in a kind of new generation of engines. And really the reason for that is being able to have very repeatable fine channels printed into these sub-assemblies. What that allows you to do is take advantage of some effects that you just can't do with subtractive. So subtractive, you have a big bit of metal and you basically drill into it, and it takes a long time, very wasteful. And some geometries you just can't do. We played with a few different firms. We found one in Pittsburgh that we really liked, had some very unique capability. We actually acquired them. And that gave us this secret sauce of being able to print our own engines quickly and then test them in-house. What we do for our customers is we deliver those engines, and we deliver them in a time frame of about 6 to 9 months, where if you look at the kind of traditional suppliers that are in the industry, it's about 2 to 3 years. And in the space industry now, that is an eternity. Folks cannot close their business models if you have lead times as long as that.
Yeah, so I'm going to break down a lot of what you said so that people are listening and can follow along. So let's start with the idea of thrusters. So the thruster market is tens of billions of dollars, but the thruster market involves a lot of things. It involves, as you said, getting from air to space, which is not what you do. It involves moving around in space, which you do, but we're going to break that down a little bit more. And it involves landing on other bodies, such as the moon. You need thrusters to kind of ease you in, and I assume to take back off. I assume we're going to be doing that again before too long. So the thruster market involves all those things, but you also mentioned that in the thruster market, there's the need to burst and move really quickly, and then there's a need to move more slowly. So some lend itself to chemical propulsion, which is what you described, but there's also electric propulsion. So
that's right.
Maybe talk about each of those components a little bit more and zero in again on what you do and what you don't do now and how you see those different components evolving over time.
Yeah, so very, very broadly, there's kind of two parameters which really matter. There's one called specific impulse, which is basically efficiency. So if you imagine you want to change the speed of the object by a specific amount, the lower the efficiency, the more fuel you need. Fuel's heavy. You want to take as little fuel as you need to space. But the problem is, generally with technology, the higher the efficiency, the lower the acceleration you can get. So this is this trade. If you have an application where you can afford to move quickly, then it means you can do it more efficiently. Electric propulsion makes sense. If it goes the other way, it's a chemical.
Wait, say that again. That's important what you just said. Go through
Sure.
that again.
So if it is an application,
Like give us an example of the applications that apply to one.
So a really good one for EP. That's the one where you can move more slowly.
EP being electric
propulsion. Sorry. Yep. The mega constellations that SpaceX are building, that Amazon are building, OneWeb are building. If you look at how they look from outside of the Earth, you've basically got these planes of spacecraft that are clocked around the
and what does that
around
mean?
the longitude of the Earth, and that's what gives you this global coverage. When you launch one of those mega constellations, you do them plane by plane. So you want to pack as many of those spacecraft on each launch as you possibly can.
And how big are each of the spacecraft in those examples?
Weight-wise, somewhere between 100 and 200 kilos. And this sofa here I'm looking at is probably about the right size. They deploy. They have big arrays. Some of them have antennas which deploy as well. But when they're folding up in the spacecraft, mass and space is everything. You want to pack as many as you possibly can, because each individual spacecraft might not be that expensive. Each launch is, right?
Yes.
So because they're low Earth orbit, these mega constellations, you want them as close to the Earth as you can, because it's all about latency. You're a telecom guy, right? That's what it's all about.
Hard to do a Zoom call if they're way up there,
right,
high in orbit.
Right. So with those ones, you actually don't have to travel that far from the launch vehicle's orbit to actually get on station. So in that case, electric propulsion makes absolute sense, because you can have quite a slow spacing operation. If you've looked up in the sky just after a SpaceX launch, have you seen the string of pearls?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what's basically going on as they move apart. So that's a classic application for kind of EP. There was actually in the industry like a big push for that, because everyone knew there were going to be thousands of units. So there's been a lot of investment on the electric side. Chemical has been a little bit different. So this is all about now you need accelerations which are subjected happen really, really fast. So you mentioned a moon landing. It's a classic. You put all the speed into the vehicle. You now need to take it out quickly. You need to control as you hover and then actually bring it down. So we're on 3 different lunar landers, providing main engines for that, which is really, really cool.
Agile's on 3 different?
3 different ones, yeah.
Can you say which ones?
I can say, yeah, I can actually. Yeah. So Astrobotic, that one's going to be launching in about a year or so. We do the attitude control thrusters, which are the thrusters that actually point the vehicle as it comes down. And then you had a guest, Ron Garan, a few months ago now, sorry. He runs a company called iSpace here in the US that is part of a bigger company in Japan. We're actually doing the propulsion for both of their landers, so both Japan and the US. And there, as well as steering the vehicle, we're actually doing the main landing engine as well. So really looking forward to that. It's going to be nerve-wracking, but I'll be sat with Ron in the control room.
Oh, nice.
Come down.
Where will the control room be?
It's actually down in Englewood,
nice.
South Denver. Yeah. So yeah, moon landing, and then the other one that is I mentioned the investment. Mega constellations drove a lot of investment into EP. Going back to your point about defense tech, the military in the past, military assets were very monolithic. They were big, but they're also in very known orbits. There is a real concern now about protecting those assets in space. There are plenty of examples in the public domain about Russian spacecraft getting up very, very close to some of our big classified assets in geostationary orbit, where some of the telecom spacecraft are. They've actually got extremely close to some of the commercial assets as well. So there's a recognition there that we need to protect those spacecraft as well. So some of these smaller breed of spacecraft which are being built now by the military, they're not just going up there to watch what's going up in space, but if they need to do something about it, they need to engage with an adversary, then they have the delta V, the speed to be able to get there quickly.
And by engage with the adversary, what you're talking about presumably is that someone else's spacecraft is doing something that we're not comfortable with, and we want to disarm it, neutralize it. So there'll be presumably skirmishes going on in space that we really don't know about, relative to kind of, people keeping their distance. Nations having spacecraft to keep their distance from others. Don't get too close spying on ours, or we might do something. Don't interfere with ours, or we'll interfere with yours. Presumably, that's a battleground that will be playing out.
So, I mean, hopefully I'm getting my years right, but probably not even 5 years ago, maybe not even 3 years ago, U.S. military didn't even ever talk about fighting a war in space. Any offensive, defensive kind of capabilities we had in space were very, very classified, and not talked about at all. Part of the reason it's now the Space Force and not the Air Force anymore is we need to be ready to actually fight that war in space. I think it was only a couple of months ago the US and a European ally actually did basically what's effectively a mock dogfight in space to kind of prove out some of these operational kind of procedures we're going to need to have. So yeah, unfortunately, this is real, and it's offensive, it's defensive. The other one that's worth mentioning is missile defense. So, fortunately, the events in the Middle East.
Tell us about the Golden Dome. We hear a lot about the Golden Dome. What do they mean when they're talking about Golden Dome? What's the scope of that vision?
Yeah, some of that's a little bit political, but I'll go back to the example I was going to give. So, you look at in the first Trump administration when there were some missiles launched towards a U.S. base. They were pretty traditional. They were ballistic. You look at what's happened.
I don't recall that there were missiles launched toward the U.S. base.
Yeah, when there was that was 2018, and there was a whole bunch of oil infrastructure that was hit over there as well. So that was traditional ballistic. What you've seen in Ukraine is now hypersonics. So that is basically a vehicle that goes above the atmosphere, is able to glide, is able to change direction. It's very, very hard to track incredibly quickly, and then come down. So to kind of counteract that, you need both eyes in space to actually track this thing, but then you actually need to intercept in space as well. With Israel, recently, they had the first, I think, intercept right above the atmosphere of an incoming missile. So this stuff is now in space.
Were hypersonics used in the conflict in Israel?
In Ukraine.
Ukraine, hypersonics have been being used?
Yeah. There's been a few from Russia.
Yep.
And
that's where electric propulsion is not going to help you out very much. You're going to need chemical. Is there another category besides chemical and electric when you think of propulsion?
There's a couple of things. So the Holy Grail, and I spoke about efficiency and acceleration. There is one technology that actually has both, and that's nuclear thermal. There's been research into that for a good 50, 60 years. There was a program that DARPA were running called Draco, which unfortunately was canceled a few months ago. That is coming, but it's been coming for 50, 60 years. So I think we'll get there, but as well as the kind of technical hurdles there, actually putting nuclear devices on a rocket, which could always fail and actually fall back to Earth, there's always a lot of issues with it.
Yeah.
Even the Mars rovers, they have a very small amount of radioactive material. They actually have a little RTG on board. It's coming, but it's a long way off. The other one, which is we actually worked on at my previous company, is just solar propulsion. Now imagine that in space, the sun is actually, it's not just a provider of photons. Those photons actually have a force with them as well. So there's a thing called the solar wind. Mm-hmm. If you have large enough apertures, so think of a big sail now, you can literally actually ride on that wind now. So when people do concept studies to go out to other solar systems to do kind of life investigation, that's the technology, believe it or not, they're most likely going to use.
And how does that work when you talk about solar wind? Is that energy coming from the sun that is then being stored in a solid state?
No, so literally a photon, as well as its energy, actually provides a force as well. It's very, 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 very tiny. But when you're in space and there's no friction, if you've got a big enough aperture, you can actually make use of it.
What's the aperture?
It's literally a big film. It's a big film. It's a big sail. Is the best way to think about it.
It's more than just. It's more literal than I took it to be. I've heard it described, but I didn't. So we
built at Rocor and then at Redwire after we acquired, we built a sail that folded up into roughly the size of a beer fridge,
Yep.
and that thing would cover a room that was about 100 feet by 100 feet when it was completely deployed in space. Just visually, so the whole interstellar stuff, which I know you're interested in, you'd have a big sail, but you wouldn't rely just on the sun's light, because now once you get far enough away, there's no force to continue to accelerate. So you'd actually fire a laser at that from the Earth to consider it accelerate, to continue it to accelerate out to other solar
So we're
systems.
driving it from Earth.
That's right.
Check that out. And then, so with the chemical and with electric, when you think of a system, some systems are going to want both, right? You're going to want a dual use. How would you describe that?
Yeah, so we're actually working on that. So you're right. There are spacecraft which carry both EP systems and chemical systems. So they may need to have a big journey to get say to geostationary orbit, which is where most of the telecom spacecraft have been traditionally. But once they're there, there's station keeping that's required. So you want to stay in the same box over the longitude of the Earth. And you don't want to do that with this low efficiency kind of chemical system. So in the past, they've carried both, done electric for the station keeping. We're working on a technology called a hybrid, where basically we take a very traditional fuel, which you can use for chemical. We obviously provide that to our own engines, but then we have a reactor on board that has some IP that allows us to be able to dissociate that. So we actually break down that fuel, and the components which come out of it we can then use in the electric thruster. So that, if you think about a spacecraft now that doesn't have to carry two sets of tanks, it doesn't have to have bigger solar arrays to accelerate things in the EP system, then you can carry a hell of a lot more payload. It's really attractive. So yeah, we've been sponsored on that one by the Space Force to actually produce it.
Very cool.
It's coming.
So let's talk about applications in space, and then we're going to start zeroing back in on the testing capabilities of Agile and why that matters, and the printing, advanced manufacturing capabilities and why that matters. But when we talk about applications in space, we talked about communications, and we talked about both traditional communications, satellite systems, and the low orbit systems that are coming into play. Huge market, very important, strategically important, practically important, one big category. We talked about defense, about protecting from missiles, about protecting from interference from other satellites. So, that's a category. Let's talk about some of the other categories of why we have stuff up in space that is commercially viable. Maybe let's start with information gathering about what's going on Earth, like satellites that are looking down here, seeing things, sensing things, and creating data that becomes useful to those of us here. Talk about that category a little bit. What's involved in mapping and sensing and
so again, I mean, it's Earth observation is a kind of broad category. Speaking about there, there was maybe a push about 15, 20 years ago. Some of the agencies here to kind of have that being more commercially supplied instead of more government supplied. So I think the first one was really Planet Labs that actually came through. They were really interesting. They were actually bought by Google in the end, and Google, I think, used all of their images in their early images on the Google site. That was cutting edge. That there was a commercial company that actually had that level of information. And you kind of fast forward now to today, there is probably half a dozen different firms that are profitable, that are making money selling imagery both to kind of commercial clients like a Google, but also back to the governments who don't actually need to do that themselves again. So that's optical, as you imagine, with your camera. There are companies doing infrared. So there was one, I think they've had their first spacecraft now in orbit called Firesat. They're actually monitoring for looking for heat sources, so they can catch wildfires.
Yep.
So this is a much faster warning than we've had in the past. Here in Colorado, especially, it's a huge deal. SAR is another one. So SAR is a synthetic aperture radar. It's basically radar from space. You can actually have more than one spacecraft operating in tandem to act as a if a virtual antenna, which is bigger to like give you even better resolution. That again was kind of capability you can't imagine a decade ago that a commercial company could do. There are at least 3 companies now, one of them out of Finland, believe it or not, arguably the leader in the world. They sell that imagery back to their own governments, into humanitarian agencies as well. They do things like monitor for famine control. It's I don't know the size of the industry, but it's billions of dollars now.
Yep. And this may be less spacecraft and more kind of drones, but being able to see like through forests and what's underneath them, to see into the earth, that's another kind of area that you can discover rare mineral deposits. You could discover ruins in kind of the middle of a forested area in South America. So I assume that there's some kind of space role being played in that as well.
Yeah, that's actually SAR. So where the optical one, you're basically looking for the photons that are coming back from the Earth. With radar, you actually fire a signal and watch it come back again, and you can make a whole bunch of analysis based off of that. So different types of SAR. One of the biggest one is you can actually image at night, which is just crazy. You can image through trees, as you say. A lot of those civilizations that you speak about, they've all been found by SAR.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I'm a big fan of Graham Hancock and the work he's doing, and kind of old ruins that are being discovered in areas that have been long overtaken by forests. And then there's the thought of manufacturing and or discovering materials or biology in space. Is that an area you could talk about a little bit too?
Yeah. My previous company, Redwire, is one of the leaders there, actually. So they have a regular cycle of experiments that go up to the International Space Station where there's not zero gravity, microgravity, because they have some very small perturbations. But there's kind of things that they do there that just blow my mind. They've actually grown parts of an artificial knee in space. So you've literally gone up there with some seed cells and actually grown a bigger membrane that's actually then come back down to Earth. They're growing stem cells in the same way. So if I've understood it right, you can get a better core stem cell seed if you actually make it in 0G. So by the time you actually bring that back, it's worth a huge amount of money. What else? There is drug research. There are certain specific drugs which you cannot produce on the Earth in a 1G environment. So whereas the Redwire folks are using the International Space Station, they're going up and they're doing these experiments. There's actually a whole 2 or 3 companies now, Varda's one of them, that are sending up capsules into space, performing some experiments, and actually bringing them back down for the commercial users. So yeah, there's that side of things, and then more kind of long term. I was involved in a couple of programs in the past where you're looking at actually building larger structures in space. So a really good example is if you want to image an exoplanet, there's a couple of different ways you can do it. So one of the common ones.
An exoplanet is a planet that has similar features to Earth.
An exoplanet is just one that orbits a different star outside of our solar system. So there are 2 ways to do that. You can kind of image the light going through a star as it's actually eclipsed by the star as it goes around the other side. You can find some things about its signature, but the best way to do it is to actually occult it. So if you imagine this bright light that's in my face here, and there was a bug that's actually flying around it, if you put your thumb up in front of it, you can see that bug much, much, much more clearly, right? So if you have what's called an occulter in space to create a shadow between you and that star, then the planets that are going around it are like much more visible, much more seeable, if you like. The size of those occulters are huge. They're like football fields in dimension. We worked on a lot of systems where you deploy to get area, but the more you fold things up to get inside the launch vehicle, the more complex it gets. There's actually a lot of risk that it's going to fail. So we looked at studies of actually producing these things in space. So you literally have little nanobots out there that are.
And by producing, what do you mean? You mean
putting Lego bricks together? Yeah, actually in space robotically to actually produce the final structure. So that kind of thing's coming. I mean, the ultimate application is actually beam power to Earth for me. So the Japanese are a bit of a leader in this. They have regular missions about every three years where they are literally collecting solar panels with arrays in space and beaming that down to Earth to what's called a rectenna on the ground so that it can be converted into electricity. That gives you an unlimited supply from space, but you need area to really get the amount of power that would be meaningful to kind of shift our supply here on Earth. You need area. So in order to do that, you're going to have to not just now assemble things in space, but even produce solar cells in space. And actually, you can do that from material on the moon. So some of these concepts are building cells on the moon, assembling, putting it together in space, and actually beaming it back to Earth. It's crazy.
Yeah, so let's talk about that as maybe the last category, at least that comes to my mind, which is capturing valuable materials from the moon or from other planetary bodies that then are useful either back to the Earth or useful for us to use in space, but have to bring it from other space bodies. Talk about what you've heard or what people are trying to do there.
Yeah, I think the obvious one is kind of water. I was lucky enough to be involved in a program that actually the Lowell Observatory here in Boulder actually watched it. So we provided some hardware that was used on a spacecraft where typically you have a rocket, the first stage will kind of burn out and separate, second stage and so on. Usually there's 2 or 3 stages. That last stage, once the spacecraft ejects from the launch vehicle, it's kind of done. It's the end of its life and this stage goes away. What we did on that program was we fired this rocket at the moon. The spacecraft stayed on top of the upper stage, and we used the upper stage to steer it so that it was coming in right into a crater into the south pole of the moon, actually where Ron's mission is heading, a crater called the Shackleton crater. And just as you were getting to the moon, the spacecraft actually separated and went behind it. The stage slammed into the south pole of the moon, and the plume that actually came up, the spacecraft went through and actually looked for traces of different elements. And that's one of the first times we found water. It was really cool. The Lowell Observatory here at CU, I think it was about 4:00 in the morning. We actually watched the spacecraft and the impact, and we could see with the telescope the flash as it hit and stuff.
If there's water on the moon, that's necessary ingredient for there to be.
Yeah, so obviously
people
with
live
water,
on the moon, for us to use the moon as a base to explore further.
It's one of the heaviest things you have to take with you for astronauts. So that's the first thing people think of is obviously life support. But you can do a lot with water. So if you split it, you get hydrogen and oxygen, which is rocket fuel. And in some ways, the moon is an ideal kind of intermediate place to actually launch to other places. So, it's a sixth of the gravity of the Earth, which basically means it's so much more or less energy intensive to actually get from here to Mars or here to another destination. So yeah, it's there's helium-3 is the other one.
We'll talk about how valuable helium-3 is here on Earth and for what cases. So if you could bring a relatively small payload of helium-3 back from the moon or otherwise back to Earth, it would be worth a gigantic amount of money.
Yeah,
right?
I'm not a nuclear fusion expert at all, but obviously it's a really key fuel if you're going to make that process kind of viable. Each year it seems the duration of kind of fusion reactions that it's stable go on longer. So once we've really got the chance to kind of make that a viable source, if you have access to it, it's going to be huge. That's the kind of thing where if deposits are in very localized kind of regions on the moon, which is what we tend to see here on the Earth, if it's in that way, then certain parts of the moon are going to become kind of competitively, going to get fought over basically.
Yeah, the nations who get there first and start to claim, that'd be crazy how that would play out, because nations are claiming, well, this part of the moon belongs to us, like says who, and what's the right international law for that? What kind of behavior develops?
Yeah, I think it's kind of hazy at the moment.
Be or not be?
I'm not sure there really is a kind of framework for how that's going to pan out. Yeah.
No, I'm sure the people who are going to develop the framework are the ones who
get
the
strongest
position, get there first, and can
right.
defend whatever framework they want to put in place.
That's right.
Because it's not going to be conceded very, very lightly. just because someone gets there first. Okay, so that's good. So I think the theme here that I really wanted to bring out, is the question of why do we need to go to space? Why does it matter? What are we really doing up there? What's valuable? There's a lot of dimensions to answer that question, and some are in the here and now, like the communications impact of space, the capturing data, seeing stuff. We didn't even talk about GPS, but the importance of GPS, the absolute criticality of protecting your assets as a nation, both assets up in space and assets on the ground here. That's just the starting point, but all these other areas of opportunity are going to create more and more space economy over time. There's zero question that it's going to be as big of a force of opportunity as even AI.
You
AI
mentioned
maybe has a timing advantage, but the space economy is just going to be a gigantic economic engine for decades and decades to come.
Yeah, I think you touched on GPS in there, and that for me is the best example of why there's so much interest. And GPS was first kind of formulated in the 70s, actually, early 70s. It was actually turned down by DoD. They didn't want it. They didn't see the use case for it. Luckily, it got funded, but it was operational, mid-late 80s, and it was all for the military. And then through the 90s, folks began to use it. They began to get incorporated in navigation software and the rest of it. That is now $1 trillion industry. Our cell phones, mine's on the floor here, they wouldn't work without that. Most people don't realize all their banking transactions, the timing for those banking transactions is baked in with the GPS timing signal. That's how they're synchronized. We wouldn't be able to navigate on our phones. People think, oh, it's Apple or it's Google. It's not.
Like the software just sits in the phone.
It's GPS, which is up there, which is giving the information. I forget what the number is, but there was a study done by Rand Corporation like a few years ago of what it would cost the U.S. economy if GPS went down, and it was billions of dollars a day. It touched so many economies. What's that next application which is going to come out? There's this explosion of space tech. There'll be another GPS.
Yeah, and GPS is very easy to spoof, very easy to take down. So the first thing one nation is going to do to another nation in a hostility is take down the GPS capabilities of the other nation, because without GPS, you're kind of blind as to what's going on. In fact, I didn't realize this till recently, but part of the dome in Israel, part of the way it works is they kind of take down their GPS system so that if there's incoming missiles, they can't work. They can't hit what they want to hit because GPS is intentionally spoofed.
Yeah.
Which is not the only mechanism, but one of the mechanisms that's used.
And it's interesting when you think about that. When you say take down GPS, there's the James Bond level of it, which is you go up and you destroy a spacecraft, right? But that's really overt. Everyone sees that. But if you go down to something that's more localized, what we don't realize that GPS signal is actually incredibly weak. It's not a strong RF signal. You need to see three GPS spacecraft to work out where your location is, and what the chips do in your phone is they use the timing signal from each of those three to work out where you are, right? Because those signals are weak, when you talk about spoofing, all you're doing locally is fooling that chip into thinking that the signal from one or two of those spacecraft is a bit different, and you can actually make it think it's in a different position. Once you turn it off, the system is exactly as it is again. So taking down GPS, you can do it at different levels, but you can actually do it pretty cheaply as well.
Yeah, one of the big early use cases in quantum is timing.
Yep.
And is quantum positioning systems. So they're much more accurate timekeeping that doesn't require a satellite feed and can be very precise for a lot longer and be increasingly miniaturized. And then using that for navigation, for positioning, for acceleration. So quantum and space are going to start coming together as well as these applications play out. All right, so let's turn the conversation now to Agile. But before we get to Agile, let's talk about your journey that led to Agile. So I actually became involved with Agile before you did. And I did it taking a lot of risk at the time, probably more risk than I probably should have taken, to be honest with you. but one of the biggest risks was knowing we need to go out there and find a CEO. It wasn't a case where there was a current CEO in place that was permanent, and we decided to bring in a new one and replace the person. That there was a known gap. There was an interim CEO that neither wanted to be the permanent CEO, nor probably would have been the right fit anyways. And so we went in with investment with the day one task of, we need to find someone pretty quick who knows what to do with this thing, or we're going to look pretty silly from a new investor standpoint. And that's what led us to meet you. But let's talk about you before Agile. Like what was your journey, and why did we bring you on to Agile?
Yeah. So, I mean, I've been in the industry my whole time. It's 30 years now, which is probably the vast majority of my life, I guess. And I've absolutely got the space bug. I love what I do.
And what is it about the space bug that really gets you going so much?
There's a few things. I mean, there's the side of it, being involved in some really cool programs, say it kind of blasé that we're going to the moon and we're going to build hardware. We'll touch hardware that's actually going to land on the moon. There's not many things that are cooler than that. But quite honestly, I get to work with super smart folks, way smarter than me, who are absolutely driven to solve a problem, which is typically extremely hard. And it's never easy. This cliche about space is hard. It's hard technically, but it's also hard because it's so complex. There's so many stakeholders that actually need to work together. We have our own suppliers, very, very gifted in like what they do. We have our customers, and typically the customer has their customer as well. And it takes everybody to actually work together. I love that. I love solving problems as a team and being part of that. It's very rarely I'll have a kind of technical insight, but I will often have a different way to kind of solve the problem than they're looking at, and that's a great day at work for me.
Mm-hmm. So how did you progress? You obviously have an accent. Where does that come from? How'd you end up here?
I just put it on to like sound cool. So yeah, I'll go back a little bit, maybe further than most people do. So I'm an accidental space guy, and I'm an accidental CEO, accidental entrepreneur. So I originally, I was always pretty good at math at school. I didn't have to work very hard, and I got really good grades. But I didn't know what to do with it, And I ended up doing a math degree, came out of my math degree. Most people got into finance, insurance, actuary stuff. Some cool stuff on the cryptography side I was kind of interested in, but nothing really did it for me. And I had a year where I was traveling, and I came to the US. I was lucky enough to get on an exchange and worked out in Flagstaff, Arizona.
But where were you born? Take us back.
Even further? You want to go all of it? So I was born in a town called Leeds in the north of England. And I guess there wasn't a big space industry in the UK, to say the least. Definitely not Leeds, although there are a couple of space companies there now. But it just wasn't on my radar as a thing I could even do. It wasn't. I didn't know anybody who was involved in the industry. There's science fiction films, and it all happens in America and Russia and those kind of things, right? So yeah, kind of fast forward, and I ended up being pretty good technically, but didn't know what I wanted to do with it.
This was in the Cold War era too, right?
This was in the Cold War era. Yeah, I grew up. Leeds is, if you've got the island, it's right in the center. And there's actually a US Air Force base about 10 or 15 miles north, doing some spacecraft operations for the US government. And then there's Fylingdales, which you may have heard of, which is about another 10 miles on. That actually used to track all the Russian ICBMs as they came over. So we were right in the shadow of the mushroom cloud, right? If it was going to go up, we were going to go up with it. So yeah, I kind of grew up with this. It's definitely on my mind. And yeah, I kind of digressing a little bit, but I'll try and go back to finishing college and finance and all the rest of it. I came and worked in the US, had a summer here, bought a car, old VW Jetta, put on 7,000 miles on that thing in about 3 weeks. Came through Boulder, Colorado. I was 23 years old. I was only supposed to be here for one night, stayed for a week up on the hill, Had a fantastic time.
Wow.
And it was like, if I'm going to live anywhere in the US, if I get the chance, this is where I want to be. And I was like 23 years old, right? So I come home from that, and I was trying to find something to do that was inspiring me. I'd worked as a maitre d' in a restaurant in London, which is actually really good training for anybody who wants to deal with folks. It's super high pressure. You're dealing with people in interesting situations. It's great. But yeah, I found a sponsored PhD by Ford doing automotive engineering. I thought, go back to college again, learn a new bit of engineering and earn money while I'm doing it. That sounds great. So I sent off for this, you probably remember called prospectuses in the day, where you literally had a book of all the courses for the college. And this book turned up at the house, and I literally opened this book, and it opened on space engineering. And I was, is that a thing, And I started to read it, and I was like, this is great. This sounds really, really good. My grades were good enough, and there was a couple of scholarships on there as well. So I applied for it, and I found out that the guy running the course was an amateur Egyptologist, and I backpacked around Egypt for about 3 months before coming to the States.
So who built those pyramids?
That's another story. Yeah, I'll come back for that one. But yeah, I went to Egypt, and every temple I went, not every temple, but probably about a dozen, I sent him a postcard and wrote some stuff in there. Guess who got the scholarship?
Oh, there you go.
So that was that. I started doing that course, and it was the first time in my life where I was doing something that I was absolutely passionate about. I just couldn't get enough of it. The history of the whole space race, the moon landings. I wasn't born then, but it was just so cool. The Cold War, part to it as well.
James Bond movies.
And yeah, I got my dream job out of college. I don't think I could have quite honestly got a better job. Worked for it's now part of Airbus. In those days, it was still a British company, and we built all of the military communication spacecraft for the MOD and NATO actually. And my job was basically doing operational support. So when there was what's called an anomaly, so something goes wrong, and that might be an operator error. It might not necessarily be a problem on board, but when something goes wrong, you're literally paged 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. You've got a guy on the end of the phone who's not a space specialist. He's a guy that's probably been working on aircraft, doing logistics, and then suddenly he's dropped into this thing. He's responsible for a $250 million asset. He's going out of his mind on the end of the phone. You've got to work out what's real, what's emotion, make sure everything's safe. It's a very technical job, but at the same time, there was a lot of people management in there as well, people under pressure, and I loved it, Dan. It was the best 5 years I've ever, fun I've ever worked.
So when you were with your mates, and you go to a pub, you'd be drinking beer, then you switch to whiskey, and it's late at night, would you guys ever say to each other, if no one's around, do you guys really believe the Americans went to the moon?
I get it all the time. Yeah. Yeah. I think it's kind of an annoying question, to be honest with you. Again, worked on a lot of different things that have gone to space. One of them is a spacecraft called the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter. It's still going after about 11 years, going around the moon. It's imaged everything multiple times now. You can look at the data from that and not just see the lunar landers that are obviously still there from when the astronauts left, but the tracks that were made by the rovers.
Yeah.
How much more kind of evidence do like folks need?
Well, that's good to hear, because the technological feat that was to do that in the 69 and early 70s. I mean, with where technology was back then, and for us to never have made it back there, not just us as NASA, but us as the world, is just hard to get your head around.
Yeah, I think,
and how difficult it is for us to do today.
A couple of things there. I think the risk posture is very, very different. Yeah. There was a real race going on there. I mean, I don't know, some of the listeners who maybe aren't as clued up on space, but Russia was a long way ahead. They had all of the firsts up until that point. Spacewalk, first man in space, dog in space, whatever. They were a long way ahead. First landers on the moon were Russian, unmanned landers were on the moon. there was a real concern about, because rocket technology was so kind of tied up with nuclear technology that the US was falling behind. So I think at its peak, wasn't it something like 7 or 8% of US GDP on the Apollo program? It was huge.
Yeah. I mean,
NASA budget today is not in that realm. It's less than single digit, I think. So there's a kind of push, but then there's the amount of effort that's been put at it. I think the other part is going back to the risk posture as well. There wasn't ISO 9100 back in those days, right? It was being made up as they went along. You look at Apollo 13, and if you've ever watched the not the actual movie with Tom Hanks, but I want to say it's on Amazon now. It's phenomenal. And you look at the technology they had, and literally water dripping onto these. It's just incredible.
Yeah.
But everything was much more ruggedized, over-engineered. Ron talked a little bit about it with the Russian space program as well. It was a different philosophy then. It's a lot more safety in mind now. We've lost astronauts, we've lost spacecraft.
Yep.
The lessons from that have like flown into it. So it's the risk posture is very different.
Yeah, no, it'll grow down. It's got to be the greatest feat in the history of humankind to date. I don't know what else could possibly compare to it. Just crazy. Anyways,
finding intelligent life.
Yes, when we find intelligent life that will outside of here that will make a difference, and they seem to be getting close to at least finding the very basic life in other, but they haven't quite totally validated that yet. So so you're now in space.
Yep. Now
space
doing my dream job. Yeah. So I wanted to move back to the States. I was absolutely. I guess I missed that job. Was not just UK MOD and NATO. There was also US DOD. So I spent a lot of time down in Colorado Springs doing exercises, a little bit in the Bay Area as well. And my love for Colorado is just. I had to get here. It was part of my being almost. I met my wife. Wasn't my wife then, obviously, and it got pretty serious pretty quickly. And I said to her, "Look, I want to move to America. I actually had the chance to move. I was offered a job here, not in space actually, but was offered the chance to come. That was a path to a green card, which is what gets you into the US for good. It wasn't a job I really wanted. She had family out in Minneapolis, and she said, "Well, let's go together." I've spent a summer out there in the States before. I'm actually a nurse. That's one of the things that qualifies you for a green card in the US if you want it. There's a company that will basically pay you to take your exams in the US and then move over. And if we get married, then you'll have a green card too. And you know me pretty well. I'm kind of stubborn, and I'll do things my own way. I like
really?
to be
didn't come across that yet.
No, of course not. I'm pretty driven, and don't tell me what to do and that kind of stuff. And that was the first time, I think, probably the biggest time in my life where I had to put my faith in somebody else. I was completely reliant on her to kind of get through it. And there were 2 years it would take her to get to the point where she had her exams so we could move to the States. So accidental CEO again, right? I knew coming to the US, if I was just an engineer, it might actually be difficult for me to get a job. We could talk about export control a lot and be good. We'll come back to it if you like, but it is a challenge as a non-US person to work in this industry because of the defense tech side of things. So what I figured was what would be good is getting some experience in something that was more business related. I like to talk, relatively good with people. And there was a market and sales job that came up at a small component supplier in the UK. It was actually lithium-ion batteries for space when they were new. So, okay, I'll give that a go for a couple of years, and then we'll move to the US. So I didn't realize, but I joined this company. There was probably 20 of us, I would have thought, at that point. And we had this technology that was in the right place at the right time. There was a whole bunch of European missions. So Rosetta, I don't know if you saw the Comet Rendezvous with the lander. Our batteries were on both of those. A whole bunch of Mars missions, Venus missions, and they were enabled because lithium-ion could basically pack in a battery that was about a third of the mass of what came before it. So we rode that wave, and that 2 years, learned how to write proposals, commercial negotiations, those kind of things. I had a fantastic mentor and boss. He was awesome because I'd come as an engineer and then suddenly I'm selling, right? And I found I loved it. I really
Well, that's
enjoyed
part
it.
of what makes Agile so special and so effective today is the combination of deep technical wherewithal. Much of that, was there and developing
Absolutely.
before you got there, but you and the team around you bringing the commercial chops to it is what really has brought it to
both.
life.
You
need both.
You absolutely need both.
And it didn't have the commercial chops, not even really any seeds planted in that until you came, brought a couple of your long-term partners with you, and
Yep.
now that's one of the gigantic strengths of the company.
Thank you. Yeah, I've got a great team. So my 2 years was coming up. My wife was just about done with her exams. We're going to move to the States, and I'm coming back from the States because we just begun to get a couple of contracts here in the US. And obviously it was as it is today. The US space market's huge. So if we're really going to grow the business, we had to be here. And my boss was, I'd love you to actually run the sales team now. And I'm like, well, Rob's his name. So look, Rob, love the company, love everything we're doing, but my dream is moving to the US, and it's time for me to go. And my wife's blah blah blah. And he's just, well, why don't you set up a sales office in the US then? And it was phenomenal. So my wife had a job, I had a job. We came over together. I could choose where I wanted to live. So as long as I was near an airport and a space hub, it was great. So where did I choose? My wife had never been to Boulder, so we came over. It was I think it was August. It was about this time of the year. And he said, look, just go to Boulder for a week and try and sell it to her, because she wanted to move to Minneapolis where her family was. And I didn't want to move there. I like Minneapolis, but not in the winter, And
You hit the jackpot with that choice, as did I. I moved there accidentally as well, and I hit
Chicago,
the jackpot
right?
too. Yeah.
So we came out, and we went camping a little bit, but we stayed down in.
And what year is this?
That would have been 2004.
Okay.
Yeah, 2004, maybe 2003, but I think 04. And came out, and there's an old B&B, I think it's gone now, bed and breakfast that was on Mapleton Hill.
Yep.
And she likes old stuff like that, so we stayed there, and she was, oh, this is nice.
Yeah.
And then
tricked her.
that first morning, we walked down to the Pearl Street Mall, got a coffee, the flat irons, blue sky, and everything. By lunchtime, she was sold.
Nice.
It was absolutely done. So we moved out for. I worked out my basement for about 2 years. The US side became pretty successful. All that work was going over to the UK, and at some point, it's mainly US taxpayer money. We started to get protests from some of the US suppliers. So I knew we had to set up in the US. And I think it was 05, 06, maybe 06. We got bought by a private equity company. And one of the things they really wanted to do was build on that success in the US. So the next call, my boss was, do you want to run a facility now in the US and replicate what we've got in the UK? So we started hiring some folks. We got to about 6 people, and we were trying to get critical mass then to warrant us building the hardware in the US. And we went for about 12, 18 months where we went from winning everything we bid to winning absolutely nothing. And it was the first sort of taste I had of what life is like in that kind of externally backed operation where you're not self-sufficient anymore. You learn very quickly about cash flow. Spent a lot of time going back to the UK trying to persuade these folks that they should continue to invest. It was 2008, 2009.
Oh yes.
It was a tough time to be doing it. And we got our chance in 2009, where the backpacks that the astronauts wear, where they do spacewalks, it carries a lot of life support. Actually carries their cooling system in. If that spacesuit actually breaks down, they actually cook before they run out of oxygen. It's pretty horrible. Calm lighting, etc. That battery was an old technology that basically give you, I think it was about 45 minutes of EVA time. It was roughly that amount. But by going to lithium ion, you could go to about 3x that. So you could do more, it's more safe. And we won the contract to do that. So up in Longmont, we actually built those battery packs that are now on the space station that the guys use when they go out in
Has
spacewalk.
anyone lost an astronaut in space due to the
I
space?
believe not, but
seems
there've been
risky.
some amazing ones. I've got a really good friend of mine. We worked together on that UK program. He's one of the flight directors for ESA. So he basically manages the European module. He's the one that's talking to the astronauts and the rest of it, and oversees the kind of spacewalks. I think he was an Italian astronaut, and his cooling system within his spacesuit actually began to leak. And if you imagine being inside this enclosed, claustrophobic space, and there's literally globules of fluid, and you're at risk of actually drowning within your own spacesuit. And it was pretty hairy. They got him in, but it was close.
Oof.
So yeah, things like that will happen, but I don't think they've lost anybody
I mean,
yet.
astronauts. I mean, I can't imagine the inner strength they must have to not just be fully ready to do it, but being willing to put themselves in those situations. I mean, you're sitting on this little, module on top of this, gigantic engine that's going to shoot you up in there. I mean, so many things can go wrong, and
Right.
You're putting yourself in that situation to move humankind forward. It's pretty amazing that people are willing to do that, and that we've kept most of them pretty safe.
Absolutely. Yep.
So, okay, so you're selling batteries.
Selling batteries, yeah. And then suddenly we get this spacesuit contract, and now it's time to make batteries. We leased out a facility up in Longmont. I think the 6 pretty quickly went to about 12 to 20. Space is all about, and it's still to some degree the same. It's not quite as tough as it used to be, but you get this chicken and egg where you can't win a contract until you've flown in space, but you can't fly in space until you've got a contract, right? So breaking that flight heritage kind of cycle's key. And once we got that first US customer, it really began to take off. So I think we got up to 50 people. Well, actually we were cash positive, which was a big point within about 12, 18 months. Because you don't want to be dependent on the mothership in the UK. Those guys are trying to do their own job as well. We're now bigger than in the UK, which was always good. But yeah, we got the company to about 50 people. There was obviously, as with any high growth company, there was a lot of challenges to overcome. You had to rally the troops when things didn't go right, and getting to that point where you've got this really cohesive team. I just absolutely loved that side of it. There was building a business, but seeing people develop as well was key. And 2011, we sold the company to a big public battery company. That gave me my green card. So I was finally going, I'm going to have to tell a story. So
All right.
export control, right?
Yep.
One thing I'm really proud of is I painted that picture of selling in the US, and building up a company. It probably sounded quite easy.
No, it's never easy.
I had the funny accent, right? And I was outside what's called the ITAR boundary. So there's a set of export controls that cover space. They cover a lot of defense articles, called the ITAR. And when you're outside of that, it's not just that you can't receive hardware, you can't be shared information with. So people just weren't able to actually talk to me. So you imagine now, not just trying to sell something into someone who maybe doesn't necessarily want it, but also has an excuse to not even speak to you. It becomes really difficult. People have to really want your stuff. And this is a really good example. I won't say which defense prime it was, but the first few years, I was still the tech expert as well as the kind of business guy, right, as we were building up the team. So I do a lot of the presentations technically, and answer questions, all the rest of it. And my company had an export license with me. So my employees were able to export information to me, but the big defense prime did not. They could not export things to me. So I'd give a presentation and I'd be talking, and one of them would put their hands up. So I knew they had a question. I left the room. I'd leave the room, then they call me back in, and then my person would ask me the question that they asked me, because even asking the question could give some information. I'd answer the question. If that was good enough, I'd carry on. If not, they'd shake their head. I'd go outside again. They'd ask this whole thing. And people would put up with that and still buy from us because the product was so good. It was hard to set up a space company without a green card. It's challenging. It's challenging.
Well, you've overcome lots of challenges. So what happened there, and then what did you do next?
Yeah. So acquisition, I could have stayed with that company, and I would have been a battery executive.
Yeah.
And I love space. The batteries were it's what I did for a decade.
Yep.
It wasn't what I set out to do. So
it's a means to the end.
The means to the end. I had my green card at that point. So I actually went back to Airbus. I ran their US subsidiary, a company called Surrey Satellite Technology that was down in Englewood. For a couple of years, I was their COO. Got their first spacecraft program going called OTB. I'm going to come back to that as a story with that one. But I was still working for a big company. I wanted to do something more entrepreneurial. I'd loved growing that team. I'd been employee number one, basically. I didn't realize it at the time, but essentially I was a founder here in the US. And I stumbled on a company called Rocore. The CEO of that company he actually had two companies. So he had Rocore that he founded, and he had a battery company that was called Solid Power down in Louisville. They actually went public about 3 or 4 years ago now. He's a good friend of mine, Doug. But I'd met him. I actually tried to hire him at my battery company, and I couldn't afford him. And I stumbled on his profile and saw this company he was growing. Met up, had dinner, and I said, "Do you want to get involved?" And this time it was deployable systems for space. So when I say deployables, it's things that unfold. So big antennas, big solar arrays. You talk about ecosystems. They built that company on SBIR money. So Small Business Innovation Research. Their grants, the first grant you get for a phase one is maybe $250K. I forget the numbers now, but it's that ballpark. And then if you're successful with that and get a phase two, it's more like $1 million, $1.5 million. And the whole point is seed money to commercialize a new technology that a particular government agency can use. So in my world, it's typically NASA, it's maybe DOD, Space Force, those kind of things. They built this company completely bootstrapped on SBIRs. They're taking no outside money, developed a bunch of IP that would enable you to basically fold composites in a way that allows you to have much less complex mechanisms than you typically had to unfold these applications. The ecosystem part, really, really smart. They basically licensed an entire IP portfolio from the Air Force Research Labs down in Albuquerque, who'd been wanting to commercialize this tech and use it in missions for a long time. So, all right, you have this technical toolkit now, which is useful. But even better than that, your customers that you want to sell to, who are the spacecraft primes, their end customer are these same people that develop this technology in the lab. So if you can infuse it into the mission, you look good, your customer looks good, but even better than that, your customer's customer looks good as well. And the whole thing is a virtual cycle. So yeah, we went from when I joined, we were doing about $2 million a year in SBIRs. It was purely development funds. My job was really to kind of commercialize that, find customers, actually bring it to market. And actually our first job was on a mega-constellation. It was a European one, OneWeb. That brought a huge amount of cash into the business. Pretty soon we were doing applications on the defense side. We went from 12 people, 2016. I took over as CEO after about 18 months. Doug needed to concentrate on the battery company. Still stayed involved, but not day to day. And yeah, I think by 2019, we were doing about $20 million in revenue. Challenges, you think you said the word challenges in there, that was a tough year. So with Agile, I'm sure we'll talk about it, but we took outside investment. When you bootstrapped, there's certain advantages of that. You have a degree of kind of control because there's a very small amount of folks that are usually very closely operationally kind of focused to make decisions. But the downside of it is it teaches you good skills for cash management, but cash is always incredibly tough, especially with hardware for space. There's a fair degree of capital investment that's needed. So you are relying on running profitable projects that can generate cash, that can kind of feed that beast to grow. And 2019, we got to the point where Trump administration had been in about a year. And what that meant was the DoD budget swelled, and the SBIR budget is actually a fixed percentage of the DoD budget. So suddenly, all these contracts folks that we worked with were just flooded. They weren't able to actually keep up with it. And we ended up that year, I think it was about $20 million of contracts, which for us, that's about the same of our revenue that was just gummed up within DoD. So these contracts are coming. You've got to hire, because talent's hard in the space industry. It can be a small group of folks. Had to expand the facility. The particular agency we're working with, we had to invest in cyber. So the cash was going down like this. And those contracts, I think, took about 9 to 12 months before they actually came through. So you get incredibly creative. I was doing studies. So there was a big telecoms provider that was out doing some kind of architectural trades. I was running the business and doing studies in my kind of nighttime just to bring money into the business. You call on a lot of your friends. So the programs that we'd had, we go and see the customer and we'd said, so that payment plan that we've negotiated, there's about 60% left of it to bill. And I know we haven't delivered any hardware yet, but how do you feel about giving us 50% of that now? And the space business is very small and intimate, and the trust you've built up with people, it comes back around when you treat people well. I say Chris McCormick, who's a big local guy here in the space community. He was probably one of the key ones that actually saved the business by being flexible on some of these payment plans. So yeah, you'll like this. Our payroll, if I remember right, was about $400K or $500K a month. Our line of credit was $70K, and we bounced along. Literally, sometimes it got down to maybe less than $10,000. We bounced along that for about 6 months. It was one of the most stressful times of my life. Remortgaged the house twice so we could put more money into the business. A whole bunch of the management team put loans in. But 2020, we came in. The contracts actually came through. Suddenly we had, I think it was $5-6 million of cash in the bank, which we'd never seen before, and we were away. But yeah, from a personal perspective and for the side of the business, we couldn't go through that again. Yeah. That model of being self-funded was breaking down. So we ended up we got an investment banker. We shopped the company around. We had a couple of interesting offers, but by far the most interesting was from Redwire. They were a private equity roll-up. So what they were doing was looking to bring in a whole bunch of small businesses in space, consolidate, provide a good back office, sales, and all that kind of stuff, so that you could have a much bigger business. So yeah, we sold the business in 2020, and it was great. We had an exit. So from the owner's side, it was a big turning point in our lives. But as I've been in this for a while now, it's about the journey. That was a great day, but it's not the day that, if I look back and think about the things that were most satisfying, it's not that. It's some of the challenges we overcame. So yeah, I stayed on with Redwire for another couple of years. I was running a division out in Luxembourg, and one up in Boston, and it was exciting, but because it was a big company, I was quite far away from what was really going on the shop floor. So crazy to look to do it for a third time. But yeah, I was looking for another company that was at that same stage, and Agile was just an absolute perfect fit.
And we had a formal search going on, and it was a nationwide search. It wasn't a local search, but to find someone here locally who was an ideal fit was we're very, very fortunate. And with that didn't just come you; it came some of your colleagues. You mentioned earlier the importance of team, importance of relationships. Tell us about how you took some elements of kind of what was already there with Agile and complement that with some people you brought on, and then complement it with some new people that have joined since.
Yeah.
And then I want to go deeper into what Agile really is. We touched on it, but we didn't really talk about what we mean by testing facilities, by additive manufacturing, and what really makes you special.
Yeah, I'll just maybe taking a step back on the people side. So I didn't realize, again, it's like my first job. I didn't realize how lucky I was until I kind of moved on and very unique. That I was able to. When I came over with the battery firm, I mean, I was employee number one. I could pick all those employees, and any mistakes my fault, right? But also, once you get good at it and you find folks that are like a good fit, you can really mold it, and your fingerprints are not just on the technology, but they're on the culture and the way that people actually work together, the norms of behavior, right? Rollcore was a little bit further past that. I was employee number 12, but we were 100 people by the time we sold. So I was able again to kind of really, really mold it and bring in some really good folks. Agile was a challenge. Agile was different. When I came in, I think we were at 60 odd people, I think it was 50, 60. And you came in at a time when the company needed investment. It had been in a stressed position for a while. And you've got to come in, and actually one of the biggest challenges was you want to do things quickly to strengthen the business and push things along, but you also don't want to do things in a hasty manner before you really understand things and see where the value of people are. And quite often, actually, it's not bad people that are in there by any means. It can be just people that are in the wrong positions, and it's getting to know them a little bit. So yeah, the challenge there, I think, was working out who the right people were, and there was some change in the first year. There's no doubt about it.
There's some cultural challenges you inherited right out of the gate that were probably a little deeper than I understood them to be when I invested.
Yeah, I'll call it scar tissue, and there's some tough love in there, right? So you can have some sympathy, and I understand that bad things happen, but at some point you've got to move beyond it, right? Mm-hmm. We're not here for you collectively. We're here to build the business together. And some people just maybe couldn't get over some of that history, and it was time for them to look and be successful in a different place. So it's tough. First year was tough, but yeah, to your point about the team, I was incredibly lucky. I mentioned one of the founders of Rollcore. The other founder, a really good friend of mine, a guy called Will Francis, who's been in the space community here for about 20 years as well. He is this very unique mix of extremely technically capable, but very commercially astute. Probably the calmest person I'll ever meet. Very opposite to me, actually. He calms me down, and sometimes I give him the G-up he needs. It's a good balance. But he decided it was the right time for him to leave Redwire as well after the exit, and came in and ran business development, and has just absolutely killed it, as you know. So BD was an area that needed a lot of attention, and Will coming in was very fortunate and very timely. I think the other one that was a gaping hole, I'll just be blunt, was on the finance side. There really was no financial process. The financial information to make good decisions was not available. It was not robust. So again, my CFO, who'd been through all those cash tribulations that I kind of spoke about, Rollcore, been through the acquisition, she also joined, a lady called Chris Shah. And so us three, who obviously knew each other well, we also had our chief operating officer, who'd been with the company actually about 3 years by that point. He was formally promoted into that position. And once we had that nub in place, and you have people trust each other, understand each other's kind of biorhythms, you can communicate efficiently, but we were away. We were away. I'd still say the director level, we're probably about sort of 3/4 of having the right people there, but there's a couple of open positions that we still need to fill. But yeah, it's finding the right people, it's putting them in the right place. But then, there were some norms of behavior that weren't healthy. They weren't healthy for the individuals, and weren't healthy for the people. And striking that balance between having something that's not too rigid, so that people don't feel like they're working at one of these very large traditional kind of space contractors, but at the same time, is not too crazy, so that we can actually make money and actually get the work done, is a hard balance. This weekend was awesome. I was down in Durango last week, and Saturday, about a quarter of the company went and hiked Engineer Mountain, which is about 12,000 feet. That's why people want to be with a company. It's not just to get the paycheck. It's not just they want to be part of a community.
Yep.
And people enjoy coming to work now.
So what's your vision for Agile? What do you want Agile to be, 5 years from now? What's the mountain that you expect to climb? What do you expect to create? How big is the company by whatever measure you want to describe it. How important is the company? What's the scope of what it's doing? Where are you trying to take Agile?
Yeah. Let me start. So the other suppliers that I've been involved with, you generate a widget, a piece of hardware, it goes in a Pelican box with a whole bunch of documentation, and then it gets delivered to the customer. And as long as things work, you never hear from that customer again, right? With propulsion, it's different. There is a degree of kind of aftermarket that actually comes along with it. So you don't just provide an engine. That engine has to be plugged into a propulsion system. There are tanks involved in that propulsion system. Once the spacecraft gets to launch site,
when we hear
it has
tanks,
to be fueled.
Let's talk about tanks for a second, because when you hear tanks, you think of your propane tank, and it's got a nozzle, and you fill it up. What's the big deal with the tank? But when you talk about tanks in space, there's a lot of engineering involved with the tank itself to make it work well on a spacecraft, function on a spacecraft, help the spacecraft do the spacecraft's job and keep it stable. So when you talk about tanks, how big of a deal are tanks?
Yeah, so in terms of the kind of value of the propulsion subsystem, by far the engines and the tanks are the kind of highest value components. The engines have been a choke point over the years, which is how Agile has been successful. But tanks are actually just as big of a problem. There is a small number of suppliers which are really backlogged. To give an idea, right, of why it's difficult, these fuels which are in there, they're not particularly nice kind of chemicals. So there's all sorts of kind of degradation effects that occur over time within the tanks. And if you get contamination in that fuel, it means that things could even fail, but definitely begin to deteriorate. So the kind of material side of things over time is hard. So getting these coatings just right. The other thing that's hard in there is zero G. If you imagine you've got a half-filled tank here, there's globules of fuel literally floating around in space. You have to actually get them out. So the traditional way is you have what's called like a diaphragm. You imagine like a bellows, which is kind of pressurized to actually push out the fuel. We're taking a different approach. So because launch costs have come down a little bit, people are actually happy to take a little bit of a mass hit if you can provide something that's quick and you can provide something that's actually a little bit less expensive. So we've come up with a design. It's actually a piston that actually drives this fuel out. And it's interesting, we use that same design in our ground systems. So we didn't realize until a couple of years ago, we've been running a ground test for this thing for the better part of 15 years that we could use to actually prove it for space. But yeah, that is actually, it's turned out to be really timely, because when you have these military customers that are moving really quickly in space, they're typically going from A to B to solve a very acute problem. And when you have a traditional tank, it's actually an issue, because when you get there, this diaphragm's not that rigid, and stuff is moving around in the tank. It's basically settling. So if you imagine the fluid in your glass, it has to settle down. That means you don't exactly know which way you're pointing, and there's time before you can do your job. But the piston tank, that center of mass is exactly known. So as soon as you get there, you can do what you need to do. Gotcha. So yeah, tanks are a big deal. So going back to your vision, we began with engines. We have a range of engines, different fuels to hit different applications, different types of spacecraft. We're beginning to develop tanks now. Our customers actually want to provide systems. So what that means is we'll get a structure from the spacecraft. So think honeycomb. We'll integrate the entire propulsion system, because that's the first thing you put on a spacecraft. We deliver it back to them so that they can finish the job. The filling, the actual launch site propellant, a lot of our customers don't want to deal with it. I forget actually if it's iSpace Japan or iSpace US, but as well as providing the engines, we've actually bought all the propellant from. We're doing all the management of that and storage in Durango. And when it comes time, we'll actually load it at the launch site. So we want to be this propulsion platform. I want to move past just chemical. We're already doing some hybrid work. That's inevitably pulling us to need an EP capability. I think that's going to be there in that kind of 3 to 5 year time frame. And And ultimately, the reason that I got involved with Agile, apart from the stage of it, there was quite clearly a need for another supplier in the industry. There's one behemoth that's been about 70-80% of the market that, check the press, has just not been performing. There's a ton of press releases you can see about it with programs. I want to displace them. They're a $2 billion company. There's no reason why we can't go
$2 billion
after and attack that.
valuation company, $2 billion in revenue.
Revenue.
So how valuable of a company do you think you could build? What would, from a value standpoint,
I'm talking to my boss here. I've got to be careful what I say.
Yeah. Talking to your investor. But is this a $100 million business possibility, $1 billion business? Is it a IPO possibility? What could this be? What in the success scenario?
Yeah, so I'll start by where we came from. So that first year that we added product as well as our test services, I think we did about $150K in revenue. As we started to win these contracts, the first ones were the lunar landers, actually. I think it was about $5.5 million the next year, then 8. Then my first year was 12. Last year was 18. So we're already growing at this 40-50% kind of growth. We mentioned about the kind of BD side of things, but Will's team has done a phenomenal job. Last year we did about $35 million in orders. We've just closed, I think it's $68 million now, and we're barely into August.
Yeah, just to pause on those numbers, because that you can't build revenue until you complete a deliverable to the customer, and you can't start a deliverable till you win a deal. So bookings becomes a really important metric in a business like this. How much new orders did you sign that will turn into revenue, 6 months from now, a year from now, a year and a half from now? So it's kind of your best leading indicator. Your funnel is a leading indicator of your bookings, but a funnel could be big and bookings could be hard to come by. But when you start booking, you start signing deals, that's a real customer commitment that leads to work beginning. It leads to cash starting to come in, maybe in the form of deposit at first. And you mentioned the number 68 million. So the business a couple years ago, as you said, was in the single digit millions. It grew to revenue-wise 17 million last year. Is that what you said?
18,
18 million last year. But now you're sitting on bookings this year of, you said 68 million. So you're going to grow from 18 last year to
this year will be about 28, be high 20s. But the thing, I've been in different technology, but similar companies before. So you have a feel for, to your point, how much of the way of orders you need to generate to make sure that the revenue backlog is there to actually hit the revenue target. So next year we've set ourselves a very ambitious goal. It's about 48 million in revenue next year. So we're in August now of the year before, and we already have enough backlog booked as orders to do 36 million of that revenue. I have never been that far ahead before.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're on a tear.
Yeah. So when you think about the company that you're building, in a lot of ways, you're really just getting started. So let's break down the testing facilities, because the origin of the company was really testing for others, right? It was a professional services company where the customers would come and say, can you test this for us? So Dowdy, the founder, was a genius in this realm and built an incredible set of testing capabilities out in Durango. Those remain state-of-the-art. They remain at the core of the business. But on top of that, you're building out a significant testing platform in Tulsa.
Yep.
Do you want to talk about the combination of those?
So yeah, the product side of the business has been really successful. The problem with that is the product does need to be tested. So our own internal facilities were just about completely consumed by that outside work. I think it's been a good couple of years since we've done outside testing, and it's great business. It's actually a little bit more profitable than the product, but it's very boom and bust. So if you get it right, you can actually utilize the test facilities as much as you can, and someone else is paying some of your operational expenses. But we were struggling because our internal product was so successful. And then actually about this time last year, Jim Bridenstine, who was the NASA administrator under the first Trump administration, he was a congressman for Oklahoma. he'd identified that they were trying to develop a space cluster there in Tulsa. And in the past, what Tulsa had tried to do is basically incentivize a large operator to actually come into town. That didn't work out for a bunch of different reasons. So the strategy moving forward was, let's get the infrastructure in place for space companies and then attract those space firms in. And Jim specifically had seen that there was a choke point in the industry for chemical propulsion testing. So he came out, he saw our facilities, but as much as the kind of tech expertise, the fact that we were open to doing that outside testing and not just wanting it for our own stuff was the winner. So we applied for a grant from the city. I had a few presentations to the Oklahoma finance folks towards the back end of last year. They're incredibly business friendly. They moved faster than Agile did, to be quite honest. I think we signed our agreement in February, and there's now $20 million coming to Agile, which is to develop, spec, build, and then actually operate another test center out there in Tulsa. So that one is going to be much more primarily for those outside customers. We have begun doing a little bit of testing again. So for Firefly this year, we've done a couple of lunar engines, but I anticipate once that's up and running in 27, we're going to be doing probably the first year of full operations between $10 and $15 million of revenue. So it's a win-win for both Agile and Tulsa. It's awesome.
And an opportunity to expand there as well, right?
Yeah, it could be past that. We have this, I'll call it innovation hub in Durango. We've built test facilities there, which are extremely kind of versatile. We can go with different fuels, different classes of engines, but that versatility comes at a cost of efficiency. So when you're scaling up on the hardware side, and we're not just testing onesie-twosie engines anymore. One of our programs is up to 400 engines, dozens a month. We need to be able to do acceptance testing quickly, right? So that's the kind of model we're going to have there in Tulsa. It's going to be much more for the outside industry, some overshoot from our Durango. But on the hardware side, again, in Durango, we're geared up for onesie-twosies. And as we go into this kind of production kind of mode, it's actually a different culture. You don't want engineers to be playing with the hardware every time you build it. You want repeatability, you want efficiency and takt time and speed. So we're looking at scaling not just testing, but some of the build outside, so we can concentrate on innovation in Durango. I think Tulsa is a fantastic place. But I will tell you, there's a huge amount of interest in kind of bringing Agile into some of the other states. Alabama is very forward thinking and has a lot of rocket talent, as does Florida. We're trying to engage with the Colorado folks, but to be quite frank, they haven't quite been as creative as some of the areas we've looked at so far.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sometimes Colorado is, and we could definitely help them engage with Colorado. A lot of them even watch this podcast. But I think there's a little bit of risk in Colorado that Colorado can take things for granted at this point. They could say people want to live in Colorado. They want to be in the Front Range. This is such a great place to scale up companies. And then they don't work as hard to really attract these opportunities. In fact, not to get off on a big tangent, you may have seen some of the AI bill stuff. Our creative legislators here are trying to shut down AI for some crazy reason. That's the exact opposite of what they need to do. I mean, I think they take for granted all of the spectacular kind of innovation that takes place here in Colorado, but you can never take that for granted because every other state wants it. Other countries want it. They want to draw talent away. And if we don't stay ahead of that, others are going to get underneath us. So hopefully some of them are listening to this part of the podcast. If not, we'll do an excerpt and send it to them. So let's talk about now additive manufacturing and paint a picture for us. You did very early in the podcast, you started to talk about kind of what we really mean by 3D printing engines. So what are you really trying to do when you're creating an engine for a printer?
So probably a place to start is just to give an idea of the kind of complexity. So the equivalent engine that we built about 20 years ago, you'll have about 600 to 700 kind of components in there. And all those components have to be sourced, typically machined, and and then they have to be integrated. You know, they have to be tested even before they're integrated. So that creates huge amount of time lag, a lot of complexity. So if you
and a lot of parts that can fail, right?
a lot of parts that
Even
can
things
fail,
like screws and glues and things of that nature, I imagine.
yeah, but just logistically to track them, you know, we have a whole team. When you go out and buy something, you've got to make sure it's spec'd absolutely correctly, and then when it's built and it comes in, you have to make sure that the supplier has done exactly what they said they would do. So there's material kind of coupon tests, and then once you've accepted it, they go into what's called a bonded store. We literally have a part of our facility which is caged off, it's locked. Only the quality folks can actually go in there. And when you come to assemble one of these engines, they'll very delicately put together this kit of parts, and everything is tracked all the way through. So if it fails on the other end, you know exactly which part, so you can go back to that test information as you're trying to diagnose things. So tracking 700 parts is huge, right? What we've managed to do is we've now broken the engine down into 2 or 3 kind of major sub-assemblies. So there's a big nozzle, there's a combustion chamber where combustion happens, you know, the fuels actually come in, and then there's some kind of mounting. That plus things that you can't additively manufacture, so things like valves that control the fuel flow, temperature sensors, kind of wiring, those things. We've got that sort of 600 or 700 pieces of parts now down to less than 20. That is so much more efficient now. We actually build the engine in less than an afternoon, and we can now get it on the test stand. That's how we deliver quickly. And
compared to historical standards would have been months and months and months to build, you know, long lead times, and then, you know, now you're doing that in a repeatable way, in an efficient way, in a high quality way. They're lighter, they're more powerful. I mean, all of the attributes that you want to end up with, including, as the name implies, speed, agile, is what you're bringing to the table, and having control of both the printing process, which is creating, you know, the solution, and the testing. You know, that's a bit of a holy grail. I mean, not too many of your rivals, you know, have those kind of combined capabilities.
So, give you an idea. We did an engine for one of the defense primes. This was before my time. We got from contract onto the test stand. So blank sheet of paper to actually hot firing on the test stand in about 12 weeks. That defense prime said they didn't think we were going to get anywhere near it, and what you did would have taken years, right? So fast forward now, one thing that I've been trying to do is, as we've grown and we've scaled, I don't want to lose that agility. You know, clues in the name, right? But I do not want to lose that agility. That's our differentiator. Fantastic story. I woke up to an email in November from a company in Europe. They wanted to look at changing their propulsion system. This was a strategic customer. I knew if we got a good relationship, then there'd be a whole bunch of other stuff that was going to happen in that area. I met the CEO for a cup of coffee. She was very like-minded. She understood what the culture of the company was we were trying to build. We could see that there was something more than just being a customer supplier. We were under contract by the 1st of January, which in itself is really fast for the space industry. And we were in what's called a fly-off. So they basically gave us a contract. They gave another supplier a contract, and they set down the challenge to be on the test stand and actually hot firing, again, from a blank sheet of paper in 10 weeks. We did it to the day. I think the other manufacturer was still trying to test about 2 months after. Really proud we did that, but that demonstration of how fast you can move, we couldn't have done that without AM. We couldn't have done it without our test facilities. Obviously, the engineers we have in there as well. But that's led to the biggest flight contract we've ever had, over $20 million worth of contract. So, yeah, speed is everything.
Speed is everything, and quality of product, quality of testing, the deep, you know, background Agile has in that all come into play. So back to my question of how big of a company do you hope to build?
Yeah, so we're growing at this clip, and with the work we have for just the engines, we're on a path to like $120 million a year in about 3 years from now. But that does not take into account the opportunity that's there from the kind of system side of things. It's actually delivering entire propulsion systems. There's no allowance for kind of EP in there. And I'll give you an idea, the EP market has traditionally been about 50% bigger than the chemical propulsion market for the last few years. Actually, chemicals growing a little bit faster. But if we can access that side of the market as well, we've got a big increase in TAM and SAM already.
And both are growing fast, both the electric and...
Yeah, I think the numbers I saw most recently, those combined for in space are going to go from about 3 billion to about 7 billion in the next, before the end of the decade.
Yeah, which is huge. So a huge opportunity. Durango, Western Slopes, not too many companies of that size and scope exist in the outskirts of Colorado, but combined with a team here in Boulder. I mean, this is one of Colorado's an opportunity to be one of Colorado's bigger success stories. We just saw Voyager go public, different part of the space industry, but go public, at a multi-billion-dollar valuation. This is a chance for a multi-unicorn outcome, and one that could be part of our permanent space industry here for years to come.
Absolutely.
So it's been exciting to be part of that journey. For me personally, it was less exciting that first 2 years when it wasn't clear if there was going to be enough cash to buy enough time in order for the company to really get its sea legs under it. We hit a home run when we not just discovered you, but discovered that you were available and that you had some people to bring along with you. And since then, it's been remarkable to see kind of the path that Agile's been on, and I'm just excited to see where it goes from here.
So 30 years ago, when I had that VW Jetta,
yeah,
you invested on that hotel up on the hill, right? I stayed in the hostel that's on the hill. I don't know if you know. There's a youth hostel there. Spent a couple of nights there. So to go from being in a hostel to being in the living room of your house doing a podcast on space, I still don't know how I got here at times. So yeah.
Yep. Well, I don't know how I got here either, but that is part of the lottery we all hit by having kind of a country here that creates opportunities for people to do stuff with their lives, and it's kind of unbounded. And a lot of us get the best of that. We get lucky, we get fortunate, we work hard, and we create stuff. And it's I said for earlier, the state can't take for granted that things are just going to happen in the state no matter what our public officials do. Well, none of us can take for granted either that we live in and have grown up in such a special environment. And things are far from perfect, but boy, we got something here that creates opportunities for people like you and me that we have to build upon, and we have to make it more available to more people, but we can't take for granted, and we certainly can't be overly critical of some of the challenges that we face, and that and that we're far from perfect. And you're an example of that, and I'm an example of that too.
Thank you.
So great. Well, good. I can't wait till we do a follow-up one and see where we're at a year from now.
All right. Sounds good, Dan. Thank you.
Man.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Bear Roars. If you enjoyed the episode, please like and subscribe on your listening platform. This podcast was produced by Loud Bear Productions and edited by Kendall Weinberg, with support from Gibson Siegert.